Welcome everyone here in Israel and around the world. We always start with some singing as people join us. So we'll start with a nigun. It's a nigun that was revealed well after Reb Shlomo's passing away, but it's become one of my favorite nigunim. Ding 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 ding, under the ding 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 ding, under the ding 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 ding, under the ding ding ding, under the ding 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 ding ding, oh, under ding ding, under ding ding, under ding ding, under the ding ding ding. Ay, ay, anay, nay, anay, nay, anay, nay, ay, nay, anay, nay, ding, nay, ding, nay, nay, ding, nay, nay, ding, nay, ding, nay, ay, nay, ding, nay, ding, nay, ding, nay, ding, nay, ay, nay, ding, nay, nay, ding, nay, ding, nay, ding, nay, ay, nay, ding, nay, ding, ay, nay, ding, nay, ding, nay. Ding 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 I nine 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 I nine 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 ding nine nine I nine 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 I nine nine I my ding nine ding nine nine ding 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 I nine ding 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 I ding 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 ding, ding 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 ding, ding 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 ding, ding 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 ding, I ding 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 ding, ding 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 ding, I ding 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 ding, I ding ding, ding 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 ding, ding 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 ding, ding 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 ding. I nine amma ding 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 under the ding 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 under the ding 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 under the ding 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 under the ding 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 under the ding 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 under the ding 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 under the ding 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 under the ding 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 I Hey nine 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 I nine 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 I nine 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 ding ding nine ding 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 hey nine ding 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 and then ding 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 I nine ding 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 and then ding 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 and then ding 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 and then ding 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 I nine ding 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 nine 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 I nine nine in the ding 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 nine 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 I nine. Our whole series, for those people who have been following, this is, I believe, the third week. We've been doing between 2 and 3 every week. The title has been Living with the Times. And we've been trying to connect to Sfirat Omer, to Lag BaOmer, Pesach Sheni. Later this week is Yom Yerushalayim, and then Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and then Shavuos. So I thought that since we're in the middle of Sfirat Omer, and Sfirat Omer is based on counting 7 weeks, 7 times 7 weeks, and because the Parsha this last week was Bahar, which is based on a similar paradigm of 7 times 7 years. Every 7th year is Shemitah. 7 times 7 years, and then the Yovel year. And of course, this is the same paradigm as counting the Omer. 7 times 7 weeks, and the 50th, the Yovel, is Shavuos. So I want to try to give over tonight many different things about sevens, and especially 7 different cycles of time. I just want to say that someone from Baton Rouge just checked in. Say shalom. I haven't been doing that very much because I think it might distract a little bit, but I saw Baton Rouge, so I'm saying hello. So we're going to be learning about 7 times 7 cycles. So the first one is the most important in a sense, is 6 days of creation and the first Shabbat, the 7th day. This is the model, the paradigm on which all cycles of time, as we're about to see, are based. And there's so much to say. Hopefully we'll get to just a little bit of it about this cycle of 6 days of work or of creation, and then the 7th day of rest. So the first cycle, we're going to go through the cycles, and then hopefully we'll have a lot to say about different aspects. So we have 7 in days. Then we have 7 in weeks. That's what we're doing now. That's Sfira to Omer. We're counting 7 weeks, and the 50th day, as we said, is Shavuos. So now we have a cycle in days and weeks. The next one is the one that the least people really know about. And that is that we have a cycle of 7 as far as months go as well. What is this cycle? So the 3 pilgrimage holidays that we have in the Torah, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, all occur in the first 7 months of the year. Pesach is in the first month of the year, Shavuos is in the 3rd month of the year, and Sukkot is in the 7th month of the year. And these 3 pilgrimage holidays actually create a cycle in of themselves. The 3 pilgrimage holidays have an application in different aspects of Jewish law, especially when it comes to making a neder, making a vow, finding lost objects, how long you have to hold on to them, when do you let people know, how do you announce it. And it has to do with this cycle of months. So we now have 3 cycles of days, weeks, and months. The next one is very well known, and that was the theme of the subject of this last week's Parsha, Bahar, is Shemitah, the sabbatical year. And this is the cycle of 7 in years. Now, it's obvious as we expand the 7s in time, in a sense, it's harder to be conscious of them. In other words, being conscious of the Shabbat every week is not that difficult because it comes about every 7 days. Really, only once a year do we involve ourselves, even though it lasts a whole 7 weeks, in being very aware of a counting of weeks. The months, it starts to get more abstract. But when we get to years, so especially people who don't live in Israel, because the sabbatical year, as far as the land is concerned, it does not take effect, only in the land of Israel. But even in the land of Israel, if you don't live on the land, if you live in a city on the 4th floor of an apartment, it's not easy to track the flow of time in a sabbatical year. What we need to understand, though, is in ancient Israel, ancient Israel was an agricultural society, very much so. And the passage of time through the years was very noticeable. If you're a farmer and you're planning out your crops and when to plant and when to fertilize and when to plow and how to do rotation of crops. So when you get to the 4th or 5th year of the sabbatical cycle, you really notice, especially when you get to the 6th year. The 6th year is very much like Erev Shabbos. There is so much to do to prepare for the 7th year because everything lies fallow. And you have to really prepare in order to be able to survive, actually. So as we increase the increments of time, it's harder to keep it in our consciousness, but they're all happening. And then we have also in Bahar 7 times 7 Shemitas, and the 50th year, the Yovel, the Jubilee year. So this is a bigger cycle that many people will only live through one time. It depends where you're born in the cycle, but it's possible to live through 2 Yovel cycles. The next one is getting very, very large, but it actually applies incredibly to our lives today. And that is the tradition that this period or this age of history will last for 6,000 years. And the 7,000th year will be Yemot HaMashiach, will be the Messianic era. So that is a huge cycle of time. But why it's so important is because in the Hebrew calendar, we are in 5780. That means we're only 220 years from year 6000. And for many people, they understand that the deeper reason, why did we start coming back to Israel in the last few hundred years, even though there was always a Jewish presence in Eretz Yisrael. And in the 1500s, that was the golden age of Tzfat, of Kabbalah. There were always Jews here in Jerusalem, Hebron, Tiberia, and Tzfat, but not many. And then, depending on where you want to start counting, but for the last few hundred years, Jews have been trickling into Israel. And then in the last 100 years, it's not become a trickle. It's become, I wouldn't say a flood, but close to that, because almost half of world Jewry now lives in Israel. So 100 years ago, we could count the Jews here in the tens of thousands. And now we count them in the millions. There's actually more than 6 million Jews in Israel right now. So many people consider, as we're getting closer to the year 6000 and the redemption that we are expecting, that is what is fueling, that is the divine plan that is being, in a sense, implemented, and that is our living history right now. So this cycle of 6,000 years, though intellectually seems like how do you even have a consciousness of that? It just happens right now. It is a huge part of what is actually happening. And that's why there is such an expectation of the Messianic era and of redemption now as we approach 6,000 years. So for those who have been following, that was the 6th cycle. We had 7 in days, weeks, months, years times years, and thousands of years. So the last one is called in Kabbalah 50,000 Jubilee years. What is 50,000 Jubilee years? This is a state after the Messianic era, after what's called Techiyat HaMetim, the resurrection of the dead, after the world to come. Then there is this period called 50,000 Jubilee years. Now this is a very symbolic number, but what it's indicating as we enter into the Messianic era, there will be a, depending if you want to call it slow or fast, development or evolution of human consciousness and the refining of physicality and the union of physicality and spirituality as we move through the Messianic era, as we experience the resurrection of the dead, which is a concept that is very, very hard to imagine. It is, in a sense, beyond any experience that we can even discuss. But what I learned from my teacher, Rabbi Ginsburg, is when we're talking about the resurrection of the dead, what we're talking about is a time when physicality will become a perfect vessel for spirituality, or in terms that we can understand where the soul and the body are in perfect harmony. Now, hopefully all of us have glimpses of that harmony, but on a day-to-day level, an hour-to-hour level, we are sometimes too aware of the sometimes battle, sometimes challenges of unifying the soul and the body. So the resurrection of the dead is talking about where physicality and spirituality meld together in a perfect harmony. And then the idea of the world to come, where death will be swallowed up forever. And then we have the 50,000 Jubilees. What this represents is an infinite and ongoing elevation of soul that actually never stops. It just elevation after elevation after elevation. That's why he says in the Gemara that there's no rest for the tzaddikim in the world to come. Rather, they will go michayil l'chayil. They will go from strength to strength. So these are the 7 cycles of 7. And of course, they're all based on the number 7. Not just that there's 7 cycles, but they're all based on 7. And because of that, there's an expression in the Gemara, Kol Shvi'in Chavivin. All 7s are precious. And we see throughout our tradition, our rituals, our halachas, how the number 7 appears over and over and over again. I remember once when we were NCSY directors in Denver, and we ran a Shabbaton. I remember it was in Estes Park. It was absolutely beautiful in the Rocky Mountains. And I'm not sure which, it might have been Parshat Bahar. In fact, it was. That's why. It was in the spring. It was Parshat Bahar, where we learned about Shemitah. So we did a game with the students. We divided them into groups, and we said, see how many 7s you can think of that have to do with Jewish tradition. And we made it a whole competition. I remember in the end, we counted almost 50 different appearances of 7s in different rituals, prayers, holidays, halachas, Shabbat, weddings, etc. So I want to, hopefully in a form, try to explain something about the number 7. So I'm holding this up, okay, and if everyone can see this diagram, and you'll see that there are 7 rings. I'm not very good at holding this book up in front of my face, but you'll bear with me. So you see the 6, here we go, 6 circles. Again, 6 circles. Now these are, you can do it on your own. These are 6 coins. If you put 6 coins touching each other in a circle, they will naturally create a middle 7th place. Everyone see that? Okay. This can only be done with the number 6. There's no other number that you could put a circle of coins around it that will form exactly the place for another coin of that size. So what is the secret here? The secret here is the same as the Magen David. If you see, there are 6 outside triangles surrounding a middle space. So the 6 small triangles are called the 6 days of creation, and the middle space is called Shabbat. Now we have a hint of this in the very first verse of the Torah. The very first verse of the Torah, the first word has 6 letters. Bereshit has 6 letters. And in the word Bereshit, you actually have the letters of Shabbat. If you permute the letters of Bereshit, it spells out Yirah Shabbat, the awe of Shabbos. And yet, when you look at how many words there are in the first verse, there are 7 words. Bereshit, bara, Elokim, et hashamayim, ve'et ha'oretz. So in the first verse, we have the hint to the 6 days of creation in the 6 letters of Bereshit. And we have, just like you have the word Shabbat in Bereshit, we have 7 words. So what we have here is a very dynamic energy. I'm going to show this again, is that the 6 days of the week, the 6 days of creation, they create the inner space for Shabbat. But once Shabbat is revealed, then it shines back into the 6 days of the week. So when the first verse says that God created the heavens and the earth, so it's explained that what it means on a deeper level is the heavens represent all spirituality, everything spiritual that would happen. And there are, without going into it right now, but there are many, many spiritual worlds above this world, many different worlds of angels and spiritual beings. And we have physicality, material matter. So sometimes we think of them as a duality. There's physicality and there's spirituality. But what the secret of 7 of Shabbat is that it reflects back onto the week. In other words, just like Shabbat is the inner space, the inner space right here. This is what's called in Hasidut Pnimiyut, the inner dimension. But that what it means translated in our own lives is that spirituality is the inner essence of physicality. It's not two different things. Physicality, its inner essence, is spirituality. So this is a very important concept because many people divide their life in a sense. I go to work and I take care of my errands and I take care of my family and I take care of my bills. And then I fit in my prayers, a little bit learning. I have Shabbat. And we see our world as very separated. But what we learn here is that 7 is the inner space which animates all of physicality. And therefore, we don't have to divide between what we call our physical life, our mundane life, and our spiritual life. Our mundane life can and should be full of spiritual energy. So having said that now, let's look at different concepts of time. And why this is important, because that's what we're doing during Sfirat HaOmer. We're counting the days, but in a deeper level, what we're trying to learn is how to make our days count. So everyone knows the experience. You can go through a day, and at the end of the day, you think back and like, what did I do today? Where did it go? What did I accomplish? And there are other days that we fill with such content that at the end of the day we say, I can't believe all of this happened in one day. I can't believe I accomplished so much. So it's more than we're just counting every day of the Omer. Today is the 36th day. Today is the 37th day. The deeper understanding is that's the physicality of the mitzvah. But we're trying to fill it with spiritual content. So let's look at actually 5 different models of time. They are all true, and they are all happening at the same time. If anyone has read any books about time, scientific books, it is one of the greatest mysteries till this day. It's very, very hard for science to actually define in an absolute way what exactly time is. Many, many different ideas, but we're going to present now 5 different ways we can conceptualize time. So the first one is in a sense, the most obvious, because that is kind of like in our face all the time, and that's what's called the linear experience of time, which we call past, present, and future. And one of the great mysteries in science is when we look at the 3 dimensions of space, they go in both directions. Each vortex of space goes in 2 directions: north and south, east and west, up and down. Time only goes in one direction. That's what's called the linear experience of time. Once a moment is gone, it's gone. And the future, of course, in a sense, is never here. But we experience time as if it's linear, like a river flowing in one direction. It's flowing. The second experience of time, and again, all of these are happening at the same time on different levels, is what's called the circular or the cyclic experience of time. Experiencing time as a circle. Where do we see this? Very simply, in the seasons. Every year we go through a cycle, a repeating cycle of spring, summer, fall, and winter. Or in the holidays, that we go through a cycle of the year holidays. Our birthday comes up every year. And it seems to be what in the 1960s Joni Mitchell called the circle game. Then we have, it's the middle experience of time, and it's the crucial one, and that's what's called the spiral experience of time, where it is a circle, but it's not happening like this. It's happening it's a circle, but each rung of the circle is elevated one level. Now, the amazing thing about this, it has to do with memory, has to do with experience, and we're going to touch on what we're going to call the gravity of time in a few minutes. But we'll just take an example, Pesach. So every year Pesach comes around, and if we live in a circle, in a sense, it's just that spring comes every year, so Pesach comes every year. But if it's a spiral, that means that, let's say this is the point of Pesach. Well, it's going to hit every other point of Pesach on a line going all the ways down to coming out of Egypt. And those feelings and those experiences come back to us. And so therefore, everything in a line is re-experienced. And in the words of the Megillah of Purim, that they're naskirim v'nasim, they're remembered and they are done. And it's explained in Chassidut, it's not that we just remember the holiday, but on Purim every year, the same energy is present and can be activated right now. The same miracles or the same morals or ethics that we've learned from a various holiday, especially the historical realities, come alive again. They're remembered and they're done. And then the fourth level, we're going to call the divine model of time. And this is where past, present, and future are all occurring simultaneously. In our tradition, we say, Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloch, Leolam Va'ed. God is king, God was king, God will be king forever. So that also follows, in a sense, the linear idea of time. But it's explained in Kabbalah and Chassidut that it means that for God, past, present, and future are all happening at the same time. The same thing in Adon Olam. V'hu haya, v'hu hoveh, v'hu yiyeh v'tifara. He was, he is, and he will be. And we know that the letters of God's name, a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, these are the letters that create Haya, was, Hoveh, now, present, Yiyeh, future. Now, one of the secrets of God's name is that not just that God creates time, but for God, time is all happening at the same time. Now, everyone's had these kind of experiences, and they don't come often, but when they do, they leave a deep, deep impression in our neshamas when we have what's called an eternal moment. It could be in prayer, it could be in nature, it could be in a historical place, it could be at our own wedding, it could be when our children were born, it could be at the bris, or a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, where we have this experience of just infinite magnitude. The idea that is given over that before someone leaves this world, sometimes their whole life passes in front of them. But sometimes we have that experience, not just when we're about to pass away, but in peak moments where we really do have a concept of divine time. And that's what's said about Avram. Avram Zaken Ba B'Yamim Hashem Beirachat Avram Bakol. Avraham came into days. Avram became old in wisdom, and he came into days, and God blessed Avram with everything. Bakol. So one of the explanations, what does it mean, came into days? It means that his consciousness was so exalted that he had one foot in this world and one foot in the world to come. And Rabbi Nachman used to explain, what does it mean, the world to come? Olam haba. He would say, a world that is always coming. In other words, the world to come is actually here. Now, whether we have the consciousness to experience it is a different story. But we certainly know how the past is here, because even as I'm talking right now, there's a very, very good chance that whoever is listening, that part of their thoughts are either somewhere else in the past or somewhere in the future, all at the same time. And then there's a fifth model of time, and this is called constant recreation. This is obviously very connected to the fourth level of time. And this is the teaching where we say in our morning prayers, we say the same idea a little bit differently, but we say, U'v'tuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereshit, that God renewed, one second, God in his great goodness renews creation every day. In other words, creation wasn't a one-time event, that if there wasn't a constant flow of God's energy into the physical worlds, let alone the spiritual worlds, that everything would, in a sense, just collapse, disappear. In other words, all of creation depends on a constant flow of God's energy. And so that's how Kabbalah and Hasidut explain that it's more than just an every day. It's every split second. Every split second, there's a recreation. And in the last, I don't know how many years, 25 years, something like that, as they discovered more and more particles in an atom, many of us who are of the older generation remember our textbooks of physics, of science, of an atom. All they knew was the neutron, the proton, and the electron. That's all they knew. Now, you have to take a whole year's college course just to understand the basic particles of a single atom. But what they have found out is in every atom, there are particles that come into existence for a billionth of a second. They've actually measured this. And then they go out of existence. And without these constant bursts of particles, again, everything would not exist. And that is, in a sense, a physical description of God's energy coming into creation at every second. So this theme of renewal what's called in Hebrew hitchadshut, from the word chadash, is a major, major theme of Hasidut. It's a major, major theme. And one of the meditations that I do is sometimes we just run out of energy. We just don't have that get up and go. And more than that, we don't have inspiration. We have a block, or we just tired, or whatever. So many times I just sit down just for like sometimes a minute and just try to imagine and experience recreation. Experience that at this very instant there is actually a massive inflow of energy, and I'm just like taking the plug and plugging it in. Because if you have a socket and you have an instrument but you don't plug in the instrument, nothing is going to happen. So it's a deep type of meditation that anyone can do, is just imagine that I want to reconnect to the constant input of energy that is happening right now. And so I once learned, again from Rav Ginsburg, an amazing idea. For those who remember how movies used to be, where on a reel, and the reel had frames, and the tape was black, and in between you had the frames, let's say white frames, but surrounded by black. And when you run the reel fast enough, you see the constant motion. You don't notice that they're individual frames. So Rav Ginsburg said that this is a very good metaphor for time. That each frame is, in a sense, we'll call it a moment of time. And then the black in between is nothingness. That's why we have this concept that God creates yesh mi'ayin, something from nothing. The something is the white frames, is each moment of time. But each moment of time, we don't experience the ayin in between each yesh, the nothing in between each something. But each something is like a tick of the clock. That is what time is the constant recreation, something from nothing. Okay, now let's look at another idea. And we're going to call this the gravity of time. This would need a lot more explanation. I'm going to try to do it in short. That there is a famous midrash that when Moshe sent 12 spies to spy out the land before we came into the land of Israel. So 10 of them came back with a very bad report, very discouraging report. And 2 of them, Yeshua and Caleb, said, yes, we can go in. And the other 10 were saying, no, we can't. They're too strong for us. We're not going to make it. And it says that the people stood by their tents and they cried. And they said, let's go back to Egypt. So the Midrash says, God says, you are crying for nothing. I promised to bring you into the land. And it's a good land flowing with milk and honey. And you're standing at your tents and you're crying. In the future, I'll give you something to cry about on this night. According to tradition, that night was Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And we know throughout history a whole string of terrible events, including the breaking of the, that was Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, the destruction of both temples was on Tisha B'Av. The Inquisition in Spain, 1492, was on Tisha B'Av. The expulsion of the Jews from England in 1291 was on Tisha B'Av. Many important dates in World War I and World War II happened on Tisha B'Av. The Gulf War happened Motzi, the 10th day, because the temple was still burning on the 10th day of Av. So throughout history, this midrash has come true. There's an incredible amount of negative things that have happened on Tisha B'Av. So the question is, if we have linear time, then how can it be that a certain energy comes back? And even if we have circular time, and even if we have spiral time, and every point along a vortex connects us with every other Tisha B'Av, but how does that make, in a sense, negative events happen over and over again? So I came up with this idea that gravity of matter happens in the following way. Albert Einstein explained this. He was the first to understand how gravity worked, that mass exerts a gravitational power on other bodies that have less mass. So, for example, the best example really is our solar system. The biggest mass in our solar system is the sun. And what the sun does is, by it's exerting a gravitational force, it curves space. And that's how you get the orbits. The Earth is going around the sun is because the space is curved by the exertion of the power of gravity from the sun. The moon goes around the Earth because the Earth is a bigger mass. So Albert Einstein also taught the unity of time and space, the space-time continuum. So if gravity works for space, now I'm talking about in conceptual terms, we can think of gravity in time. In other words, and this actually has very deep practical applications to our own lives, is that when something for the good or the bad happens, and it's of like momentous importance, it creates, in a sense, a gravity in time that will reproduce the same energy. The same energy. It's more than just remembering, let's say, every Pesach on a spiral, we're one rung above every other Pesach. And it's even more than it's how it's done. We learned this before. Nizkarim v'nasim, that the energy of the holiday, for example, returns. But it returns because there's this concept. It's just something how we can conceptualize it, that there's gravity in time. So that night they stood and they cried and said, let's go back to Egypt. In other words, the whole plan of coming out of Egypt, receiving the Torah and coming into Eretz Yisrael was in danger. And so it had momentous ramifications. In fact, they had to wander for 40 years because of that. So it's the same thing, in a sense, in our own lives, that we can create moments whose good energy will come back over and over again. This is what I call the gravity in time. Okay. Let's take a drink of water here. I said a bracha before. Okay, so now there's so much more to give over, but we have limited time. So I want to give over something about Shabbat that relates to everything that we've talked about. There's an expression in the Gemara that Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come. So when we hear that expression, we can relate to it in a sense like a glass half filled or half empty. Someone could say, only 1/60th? What's the big deal? A 60th is not very much. Or someone could say, a 60th of the world to come? Wow. It might seem like a little, but the world to come is infinite. So even a 60th of infinity, I'll take it. So the Slonim Rabbi has a very, very important parable. And it's based on a saying from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov said, if you hold on to a part of something that is infinite, then you're holding on to the whole. So the Slonim Rabbi gave a metaphor. He said, if someone's on a ship and chas v'shalom, they fall off the ship, and they're drowning, and the ship keeps on going. It's not easy just to stop a steamboat or a motorized boat. And someone sees and throws them a line, and the person in the water holds on. So the Slonim Rebbe says, as long as he's holding on to the rope, he's connected to the boat. If he lets go, he's no longer connected. So if you hold on to a part, you're holding on to the whole. So the same thing with Shabbat. If Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come, then we're holding on to the world to come. Now the question is, are we living Shabbat like that? Or is Shabbat it's a day off, good rest, good food, but are we really, really taking advantage of the time of Shabbat? Because there are moments in Shabbat that are infinite, because we're holding on to the world to come. And a way to understand this in a practical way is we're told in Halacha that we're not supposed to make any plans or take any action on Shabbat for something after Shabbat. We're not supposed to be looking at our watch and thinking about when does the movie start? When do I have to jump in the car for this or for that? It's as if the future doesn't exist. We're supposed to, in a sense, put the future out of our mind. It's not forbidden to think about the past, but if it has to do with work, you're not supposed to be thinking about all the work that you didn't get done, about all the things that you still have to do because you didn't do them already. So if you, in a sense, put out of your mind the future and you put out of your mind the past, so what is left? It's what we'll call the eternal now. Or in the jargon of the 60s, be here now. But Shabbos is really the source of this. It's really the source of this. Because it's the one time that we can experience life as it's happening in that moment without all the distractions of thinking of the past and the future. We are just enjoying the food in the present. We're enjoying our families in the present. Taking that slow walk, sitting with a book, that extra sleep, the singing, the praying. Everything is in the moment. Everyone knows that at Shachrit, the morning prayers, it's a real challenge not to be thinking about what you have to do 5 minutes after you're done davening. How are you going to get to work, and what you have to wear, and what are you going to eat, and how are you going to get there, and what you have to do. It's not easy to put your whole heart and soul into the prayers when we're in the middle of life. But Shabbos, is, in a sense, is an island of time. So the Sloan of a Rebbe said a beautiful thing about counting the Omer. That is what inspired this whole idea of secrets of 7 cycles of 7. Is it says, Usfartim lechem mimacharat Shabbat, and then it goes on and it says, Sheva Shabbatot mimot tiyena. You shall have 7 complete weeks. And so the word here for weeks is Shabbatot. But that also means Shabbos. So the Slonim Rebbe said, along with all of the tikkunim that we need to do during Sfirat HaOmer, one of the biggest fixings that we have is to make all of the 7 Shabboses that are part of Sfirat HaOmer as deep and as high and as exalted as we can. Because coming out of Egypt, we're told that the word Egypt is from the word Meitzar, from Nero. And we're told that when applied to our lives, this means that constantly we have to come out. We have to break through the limitations that we set upon ourselves through routine and rote. It's a constant challenge to make our life seem renewed all the time and not fall into rote. But this applies in the spiritual level as well, that it's just as easy to fall into routine and rote, even with good things, even with spiritual things. And so the Slonim Rebbe was saying that during Sfirat HaOmer, when we're counting 7 whole weeks, he's reading it, make your Shabboses whole. Hold on to the world to come. Hold on to the infinite moments that we can experience. I want to end with a story that when many years ago I was teaching at Hebrew U as part of what we do. And I was teaching a class about Shabbat. And I mentioned that every Shabbat I try for at least a few moments consciously to experience a moment beyond time. And I mentioned that it could happen anytime during Shabbat. Sometimes it happens during prayer. Sometimes it happens just walking slowly and just looking at the clouds and listening to the birds. Sometimes it's just getting up in the morning and it's quiet out and no one's around, and step outside and everything is beautiful, everything seems perfect. And I said, I call that my moment of Shabbos. So, I don't know, many months later, I had a group of students from Hebrew U. And we're at the table and we're eating, we're in between. And a girl who's sitting near me turns to me and says, did you have your moment yet? And at first, I couldn't understand what she meant because it came like kind of out of context. And then I realized she was at this class that I gave, and she was asking it for real. And the truth is, I had my moment already, and I told her what it was that Shabbat. But this idea is very easy to attempt, at least. I can't guarantee it will happen every time. But even for a few moments on Shabbat, is to just let the past go, let the future go. In a sense, also the present go. In other words, to go beyond the ego, go beyond the self, and just experience what's called the bliss of Shabbos. Just the perfectness of Shabbos. We know that we don't live in a perfect world. We know that all too well. And yet, it's like the diagram I showed you before, where you have the Magen David, and the 6 small triangles around are the 6 days of the week, and the inner space, the inner hexagon is Shabbat. And that inner space mirrors itself back into the 6 days of the week. And that's why in the Zohar, a tzaddik, a righteous person, is called Shabbos. Because for a tzaddik, they are living a reality where Shabbos is the inner dimension of the week. It's something that can be accessed, the peace and the harmony and the rest of Shabbat. In other words, one can accomplish a whole lot in the physical world and yet be very calm and centered in their inner world. It doesn't have to be a contradiction. For many of us, that's a really hard challenge. How to, what the Baal Shem called zirizut b'metinut. Zirizut means alacrity, to move fast, get things done, b'metinut, in a calm, measured way. So give everyone a bracha. Give everyone a bracha that we still have a good almost 2 weeks till Shavuos, a little less now. But let's make our time count, not just count the time. And let's contemplate these different models of how we experience time and try to be like Avram Avinu, to have 1 foot in this world and 1 foot in the world to come. Thank you all for listening. And this coming Wednesday, we're going to be learning about Yom Yerushalayim. Please join us. Thank you.